Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Rachel Cook, and I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations at Cal State San Bernardino. The ICDFR provides resources to youth and families across the Inland Empire. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Agers, who is a professor of industrial and organizational psychology and a director of the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations at CSUSB. His primary research interests focus on the work-life interface with an emphasis on how work demands impact individual and family health and well-being. He's particularly interested in the work-life experiences of low-income workers and their families, and in challenging societal norms and individual beliefs about the value of work relative to the value of health, family, and child development. So, Dr. Agers, take it away.
Excellent. Rachel, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here today. As Rachel indicated, I'm going to be talking about managing work and family boundaries during COVID-19. I know that this is something that all of us have been struggling with. It's on all of our minds almost all the time. And so my hope for today is that we can talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you're all facing, talk about some possible solutions. It's certainly not easy, but hopefully some of the information that we share today will be helpful, and I welcome your questions throughout as well. So I think when we start, it's important just to be honest about what we are facing, right? I mean, managing work and non-work responsibilities has always been a challenge. But the experiences of COVID and what that has brought to many of us is a slew of new stressors, right? Whether that is challenges to our income and feelings of income insecurity or home and health uncertainty. If you're a parent and you have school-age child, it means homeschooling responsibilities now. The pandemic has also caused an incredible decrease in available childcare, especially quality childcare. Many of us are finding that our home space is now our workspace. If we're out in the workforce still as an essential worker, we're facing increased health challenges. And there's just in general this heightened pressure around work because of the economic challenges, right? So these are real demands that have been added to our plates, and few, if any of us, have been left unaffected. But I think it's also important to be honest about what we've faced before. In other words, while it's clear that COVID has brought new work-life challenges for all of us, right? Increased demands from both the work and family domains. It is also true that over the years, we have developed as a society and as individuals, some pretty potentially problematic habits around work and family, right? So for example, while many of us are now working from home is not a new challenge, right? The idea of work creep, right? That we find ourselves in our home environment focused on work has been a problem, a challenge for a while. This idea that we need to go into work while we're sick, either because what we have to do we feel is so important, or because there's so much pressure that if we don't show up to work when we're sick, we might not have a job to return to, right? Or that we skip meals, we eat at our desk, or we're always working and taking extra opportunities to work. Now, some of these things happen for good reasons, right? We do them for good intentions, but the reality is their impact is problematic, right? Their impact on us in terms of personal health, in terms of family well-being, is problematic. And I want to be clear, right? As I'm saying this, and I imagine some of you are thinking about, yeah, I have these same experiences in my own life, right? I'd be shocked if there's someone out there who was like, yeah, all this is foreign to me, right? These are things that we do and challenges that we are all struggling with. And I tell you, I'm not an exception, right? This is a picture of me, and I love this picture. That is my oldest son, Maxi. He's 11 now. That's when he was 5. And you could see this, like what I think, right? I'm the parent, so of course I'm going to think this, right? This is my adorable son sitting on my shoulders, and isn't it a cute picture? But I share with you today that as someone who studies work and family, and I teach work and family, and I talk to folks in the community and in industry about work and family and the importance of finding a balance, et cetera. But the reality is, while this looks like a cute picture, this picture is actually the result of me being home on a Saturday, working on a deadline, trying to get it was a grant proposal done and out. And my 5-year-old son, who sees me at home on a Saturday, wants to play and wants to talk to me, right? So he's there, he's like, hey, dad, hey, dad, hey, dad. And so this picture is actually the result of me taking him and like sticking him on my shoulders so that I could have 5 or 10 or 15 minutes of peace to actually work. Now that, so again, it's a cute picture, but for me, I'm proud of myself today. I usually get choked up when I tell that story because it's just a stark reminder of how easy it is for us to heighten our work responsibilities in the face of family, and what is the cost of that, right? What are we missing out? So anyway, I share that story only because I want to share with you that this is hard for everybody, right? This is balancing work and family and figuring out how to manage those oftentimes competing demands and responsibilities, taking care of our families financially while also meeting their social needs, their emotional needs, our own health and relationship needs. This is a challenge that we all struggle with, right? And so why do we care about this, right? You all came today to hear about this topic and hopefully learn solutions. Why do we care? Well, we care because when we don't do it well, right? When we struggle managing our work and family responsibilities and we experience that conflict or we experience that strain and stress, right? That has very real consequences for us, particularly related to our health, right? So as individuals, when we experience high levels of work-family conflict, research has shown that that's related to anxiety, it's related to depression, it's related to basic physical health. It's also related to long-term health outcomes like heart health, right? Or alcohol and substance abuse. Struggles with managing the work-life interface also relate to family and life consequences. We talk about parent-child relationships, talk about lower marital satisfaction, lower family satisfaction. Even more severe outcomes like domestic violence are heightened in the context of work-family conflict. And it even affects us in the workplace as well, right? People who experience heightened levels of work-family conflict, they're more likely to withdraw from their organization, and they often see lower levels of performance, right? So the negative consequences of this are real, right? And, we're the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations. So, when we look even closer at that, this is one of the areas. Research on the work-life interface has done a really good job of identifying the challenges and consequences that come from experiences of work-family or work-life conflict, right? And one of the areas that's really kind of exciting right now, where a lot of new research is being done, is related specifically to parent and parent-child and family outcomes, which is really exciting because we need that work, right? And what that research has already shown us is that challenges or inability to manage that work-life interface well directly impacts us as family members, as partners, as parents, and that impact continues on to our children, right? It means we spend reduced quality time with our partners or with our children. It means we're less likely to be involved in our children's school activities or to be helping them with homework and reading with them. It often interferes with extracurricular activities, the trip to the park, right? Taking our kid to go bike riding, right? Or a weekend camping trip. We do these things less often. We see increases in relationship friction, not just between partners, but also between parents and children. Family routines, which are really important to healthy families and healthy child development, often are violated in the context in response to work-family conflict. Family environments can become more chaotic. And all of these things, right? The family environment, the changes in the parent-child interactions, impacts healthy child development, right? Whether we're talking about cognitive development, social-emotional development, right? These outcomes, these experiences, right? And the challenges we face managing the work-life interface matter for ourselves, for our families, for our children. Right? And again, I would say that these are challenges that we have all faced and are all struggling with. They look differently for each of us, whether we are working in a part-time job, in a low-wage job, in a white-collar position, right? There are different versions of what this looks like, but the conflict is present. The challenges are real. So the question then becomes, what can we do about this? And, I will say before we get too far down this road that while I think the research in the work family research has done an excellent job of demonstrating the challenges and the consequences of work-family conflict, I don't know that there are a lot of great solutions yet, right? That is an area that as a field, we are working hard at. That is an area that increasingly we need organizations and public policy to address and be aware of just how important and how damaging not having solutions for managing work life can be. So why do I share that? I share that because when I start to talk about what can we do about it, what you're going to see is a lot of it is about you. A lot of it is going to be about what can I, as an individual, change in what I do in my world, in how I think about my world, how I interact with my partner, with my children, to deal with this outside, right, this external stressor, right, this work-family conflict. All right. But what we do know, right, is that if we don't change at all, it's not going to go away. And as COVID has shown us, right, it has the capacity to get worse. All right. So what can we do? Well, one of the first things we can do is be proactive about managing the boundaries. And what I mean by managing boundaries is I'm talking about the boundaries between work and home. Now, this is something that's always been a challenge, right? In other words, people still thinking about their work or checking email on their phones when they're home, right? So that the idea that work can emerge in our home domain or that home responsibilities can emerge in our work domain, that has always been a boundary management challenge, right? Something that we're supposed to be working on. Under COVID, that has become increased, right? Increased both because many more people are working from home, at least part of their work is home, but also because of, for example, the increased health risks of being at work. If you are going to a workplace, means that the stress and anxiety from that can also be brought home, right? So we have to be intentional. We have to be proactive about managing the boundaries between family and work. And so what that means is, in part, we have to avoid bringing work home. And I mean that tangibly, right? That, avoid bringing active work responsibilities and tasks home when that can be avoided. But I also mean that cognitively and emotionally, right? That we have to work hard. And I don't pretend that this is always easy, right? But it is important for us to recognize that the challenges and emotions that happen at work, to the extent that we can be home and be present in our home when we're home with our partner, with our children, with ourselves if we're single, right? But keeping that boundary clear is important, right? Resisting easy paths to work creep. And the most common challenge of that, of course, is our cell phone, because our work is always present in our cell phone for so many of us, right? So it's really important to set up obstacles to yourself, right? To set up barriers to saying, okay, I'm just not going to check my email, my work email after, whatever that time might be, right? Resist those easy paths. And they're designed to draw us in, right? They're designed, cell phones, email, et cetera, the dings, the reward systems, the notifications, they're set up to grab your attention. So think about ways to resist that, right? Remove some of those notifications, remove those sounds that draw your attention away from where you are at home and into your work. If you are working from home, to the extent you can, create separate space. Now, that's not easy for everyone. It's not great for me. My workstation is upstairs in our master bedroom. But to the extent that you can have that space and be separate, and when you're done with your workday, walk away from that and leave it and not go back to it, and not to have it be the same station that you do other things, can also be really helpful. Making proactive decisions and boundaries of time and space is what I was referring to a moment ago, which is you do have to be proactive in defining where those boundaries can be, right? And it's going to be different for each of you depending on your own work situation, right? But identify what is the time that I can genuinely disconnect? How can I set concrete barriers around and protect personal time, family time, individual time? Segmentation preferences matter, but what I mean by that is that we all differ in what are called segmentation preferences. And it's basically the extent to which we prefer or we are comfortable working in an environment where our work and family responsibilities are kind of merged and blurred together, right? Versus we're someone who, when I'm at work, I need to be at work. And when I'm at home, I need to be at home, right? So we all differ a little bit to the extent that to where our preferences are, right? And in general, for folks whose segmentation preferences are more open to blurring the boundary lines and being able to do family stuff on work time and do work time stuff during family time, that can actually make managing the work-life challenges a little bit easier, right? When we're not so rigid in our preferences. But the danger, and I think it's particularly true under COVID, the danger is that where does that blurring stop, right? And are we, while we're comfortable dealing with work and family in the same space, right? Are we able to eventually set boundaries and make sure that we have that dedicated personal and family time? That's always been challenging. I think it's particularly challenging under COVID because those work pressures have grown even stronger. But being proactive about how we manage those boundaries is one of the really important things that you can do. The second thing is that you need to manage your expectations and be honest about your reality. These are not normal times, right? As that opening slide suggested, we are all facing challenges that we have not anticipated, right? That we are not necessarily set up to thrive in. And so if we keep the same expectations about what I'm going to look like as a worker and what I'm going to look like as a father and what I'm going to look like as a partner, right? If we keep those same standards and we don't acknowledge and we don't recognize that there are these additional responsibilities and challenges that we have to respond to, we are setting ourselves up for failure, right? So I don't know if this sounds overly simple or not, but it's really an important thing to recognize that our expectations can change, should change, and they need to change, right? Revise your standards for the times. It doesn't mean get rid of standards, right? It doesn't mean that we no longer have expectations for, being a loving spouse, being an attentive parent. Of course we do. But we also need to recognize that we can't do all of the things that we maybe used to be able to do, at least most of us can't, in part because there are all these other things now that we're responsible for. One of the things that helps in managing expectations, managing responsibilities, can be using, organizational skills, calendars, developing goals and task lists. These are some of those sort of tools and tricks, skills, et cetera, organizational skills that people talk about a lot as being useful for managing extensive work-life responsibilities, and that's been true for a while. But I want to do two things. I want to endorse their effectiveness in the short term, right? So in other words, the short-term value of developing better organizational skills, of using task lists and goals and calendars to manage all of the myriad responsibilities that you have in your work and family lives. They're important, right? They can be effective, particularly in the short term. The challenge, however, is that they don't change your internal standards. They don't change by themselves your internal expectations. So the danger that they have, right, the danger that they bring is that as your organizational skills improve, as you start to experience the benefits of, oh, okay, wow, things are going smoothly because I'm now well organized and I've got everything on this calendar, we start to add more, right? Because we're managing it, because we've got it. And so the danger, right? I want to be clear. These can be useful tools in the short term. The danger is that we need to recognize the benefit that they bring without seeing that as an opportunity to take on more and add more to our plate, which is one of the things that often happens. Okay, so how else do we manage our expectations? We take breaks. There's a lot of research that shows that we are healthier, we are more functional, we are more productive when we allow ourselves to take breaks rather than just working ourselves to exhaustion day after day after day, right? And these don't have to be long breaks, right? Micro breaks, power naps, removing ourselves for a moment, for a small piece of time from whatever that work stressor is, whatever that family stressor is, right? Being willing to say, wait a minute, I need to break away from this for a moment. Saying no. Part of managing expectations is recognizing that we cannot do all of the things that we've always done. I need to be able to say no to some things in order to continue to survive, to try to thrive. That's part of revising our standards, recognizing that we need to say no. And also practicing self-forgiveness. We have to be, again, honest about our reality, honest about these challenges. And what that means sometimes is being able to accept for ourselves that we cannot do it all and that that's okay. That there are certain responsibilities that need to be put off or look different than we had hoped they would look. And again, that's okay. Practicing self-forgiveness is an important part of managing those expectations and being honest about the reality, particularly under COVID. Whether you're talking about a romantic partner, a parent, another member of your household, it is important to remember that this is a collective experience, that managing the work-life interface is not something that an individual need to do all alone, right? and that we work with our partners to manage that effectively. Right? And so it's important for us as individuals to support our partners in their managing of work-life challenges or just life challenges if they're not in the workforce. Remember that your partners are also experiencing added stressors, just as you are. Right? And remember too, that in the moments where you are struggling, or in the moments where they are struggling, right, then you as their partner are a resource that can make up for that. Right? And that as partners, we do that together. As a family, we do that together. So strategize as a family, plan for important tasks, right? If I'm taking on these challenges, what challenges are you taking on? If you're taking on those, what can I do? How do we do that as a family, not just as a single individual trying to balance my entire family's reality or responsibility, right? And involve all family members, involve your children. Right? Children can take on tasks around the house that perhaps they hadn't taken on before. The collective family is a critical resource for us all as we manage work and family responsibilities. And I want to add that it's especially important to support moms. And I know, I don't doubt for a moment that there are dads out there right now listening to this who are going to listen to this, and they're like, hey, I need support too. And you're right, dads need support too. And there are also dads out there who are doing a ton of work. So I don't mean this to be disparaging of dads. Support dads too. But it's especially important to support moms because one of the things that COVID has done, is that it has increased tremendously the pressures at home, right? Whether that's because more family members are in the home, and so there's more laundry, there's more dishes, there's more food, there's more cooking, there's more cleaning, or because kids are now being homeschooled, so there's more. Well, the reality is that women, far more than men, have taken on those responsibilities, right? So the vast majority of these extra responsibilities, they're more likely being taken on by women than by men. So it's especially important to support your moms. You also have to take care of yourself, right? One of the things that managing work life in general, managing work life during COVID, you have to engage in self-care, right? If you are going to change the impact that work stress has on you, that work stress has on your family, then you have to think about who are you in that context and how do you protect yourself from the stressors and pressures that come from work. So part of that is about focusing on your values, right? And identifying what is important to you, what is important to you beyond the workplace. How do I prioritize family interests, right? We can get caught up in the pressures and the importance of work. We can get caught up in the stressors and responding to, gosh, what has COVID brought that we now have to deal with as a family, right? And in doing so, we can sometimes lose track, right, of the things of the things within our family interests, our family activities. And so remembering to prioritize proactively engaging in family activities is really important. Continuing to cultivate our relationships. Social support, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide, but social support is a critical buffer from work-life conflict. And so cultivating relationships outside of the context of work. Related to that, I'm going to skip one, but investing in life, right? That goes right in hand with cultivating relationships outside of work, right? In other words, being mindful of, these are things that we can do as a family. This is who I am as an individual. This is who we are as a family outside of the context of work, and making sure that we feed that, right? Making sure that we engage in that and indulge in that so that becomes an important part of who we are, that remains in the forefront of who we are. Doing that has a positive impact on our own personal health, on our family health, on our relationships, on our children. I also want to mention that, we already talked about self-forgiveness, right? But it's also important when these stresses get too much, when these struggles get too much, seek professional support. We are not meant to face all of these challenges on our own. We are not meant to be able to just survive and be resilient to whatever life stressors come to us. There are times when those challenges are simply that strong, right? Are simply that big, that real, and that seeking counseling, seeking formal support, seeking professional help is the right thing to do. Support yourself in that. Support your partners in that. Rely on your social support network. As I mentioned a moment ago, one of the things that comes out of the research on work and family all the time is that social support is a great buffer to work-family conflict, to work-life conflict. Right? And it kind of emerges in different ways. There's some kind of formal ways, right? Like know the policies that exist for you in your organization and communicate with your supervisor, right? Now, the reality is policies alone often aren't enough. So that supervisor support is important. But if supervisors don't know your challenges or don't know your needs, they can't necessarily help you in the ways that you or your family might need help and might need support. So be aware of your organizational policies and communicate with your supervisor. Coworkers are another form of support, right? So strategize with coworkers. Maybe that's just about venting and commiserating and sharing, and talking about shared challenges. It also may be being proactive about, hey, can you cover my shift, or can you watch my child and I'll watch your child another time, right? But seeing them as a source of support. Knowing your community resources, right? Who's out there? What does First Five of San Bernardino County or of Riverside County have to offer for me? How do I touch base with county childcare resource and referral, right? To be able to find what's available to me for childcare, right? What does San Bernardino County or Riverside County Public Health offer for struggling families, right? There are resources out there. Know what they are. Stay in touch with family and friends, right? Create safe social bubbles. Engage in virtual coffees and virtual happy hours. I have a virtual coffee scheduled for later today that I'm looking forward to. These are valuable ways to maintain our social networks, to maintain that social support. And look, COVID has pushed that, right? It has pushed us to where we don't have the same social contact that we used to have. We don't have the same social opportunities to meet and to decompress and to share and to support. So we have to be proactive about creating those opportunities so that we can rely on the social support that we all need. That's so valuable to us. Now, the last thing I'm going to mention is that, everything we've talked about thus far is about what you can do for you, right? What you can do for yourself, for your family. But I have a challenge for you out there, for any of you who is a part of this, who might be a leader, right? Or a supervisor, or have some level of authority control over other workers. The reality is you're critical. You're so important to finding solutions for your workers. I should say that differently. You're so important to your workers, to your employees' ability to successfully manage their work-life challenges, right? Policies alone don't matter. Employees first of all, there aren't a lot of great policies out there. A lot of jobs don't really have any work-life policies that are targeted for them or that are meant for them. And even when they do exist, employees are often anxious about utilizing them for a number of reasons, including they fear they might not have a job if they use work-life policies. So it's really important as a leader to make clear to employees that the policies that are there, that you support them, right? And that they should use them when they need them. It's also important as a leader to provide emotional support and let employees know they're cared for. Right? Now, I don't mean that you need to give daily hugs. In fact, I would discourage that. But what it does mean is let employees know that they're human and that you recognize that, right? That their lives matter for more than just the fact that they're a worker and they help your organization function. Model family balance in your own life. Your employees will look to you to see how they should handle their own work-life challenges. If you always prioritize work over your family, they will as well. But if you model family first behaviors, then they will feel comfortable doing so for their family as well. Support employee requests and needs for family accommodations, right? Whether that's through supporting existing policies or seeking and providing creative solutions that allow your employees to meet their work and family needs, right, without great compromise to the world of work. And I think what we find more and more is that when we provide those solutions, they work out for all parties, right? They're best for the employee, their families, and the organization as well. And the last thing is, to the extent that you can, provide flexibility and control. One of the things that emerges over and over and over again is that the best way for an individual to deal with work and life challenges, work-family conflict, right, is by having control over their work lives, is by having flexibility in their work life. When we have flexibility, when we have control, these are tools that as employees we can use to manage those challenges and minimize those negative effects. As leaders, you have the possibility, you are in a position to provide that to your employees. So seek ways to do that. So that's the mandate for leaders. A lot of the other stuff was, hopefully some things that you found helpful that you can do in your own life. I wanted to include a slide of just some community resources around family, around managing work and family life, around mental health. These will be posted with the video when it is stored and archived and uploaded. But again, there are a lot more resources out there in the community than you might be aware of, and they can be really important. So I encourage you to check some of these out as well. And with that, I just want to say thank you for joining us today. I hope that there was some information in there that was useful, that is helpful to you. Please continue to follow the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations on Facebook, on Instagram, website. We've got a new website coming soon, fingers crossed, with the whole intention is to provide resources to you and to your families. So please, stay in touch, keep your eye on us for more useful stuff as we go. And with that, I'll see if we have any questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Agers, for that information. I hope that everyone here will find some of that helpful. And so now we have a few questions from our attendees that I'm going to ask you. To start out, so one of the things that you mentioned is important is to try to find time to take breaks and make sure that we have enough space and time with our family and quality time with our family. So how do we find time to take breaks when everything is so busy and hectic? How do we find time to make sure we can take our kids to the park and things like that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, I don't know how to include the caveat, like throughout this talk with every sort of nugget that I was trying to share, right? With every I wanted to convey this acknowledgement that all of these things are not necessarily easy to do, right? And they all require intentionality on your part. And I would also add, and then I promise I'll actually answer the question, right? And I'll also add that for the variety and various solutions that I talked about, you might see some that work perfectly for you and others that are impossible for you, right? And so if you have a supportive supervisor, then talking to your supervisor and doing that is going to be more helpful for you than it might be for someone else who doesn't have a particularly supportive supervisor. If you have a supportive partner at home, then that whole sort of strategizing with your partner and working together as a family might work. And if you have a more difficult relationship, that's going to be harder, right? So I acknowledge that all of these solutions are pose challenges, right? They're not simple and easy always. And that what works for one person might be different than what works for another. So I do want to say that up front. But to the question itself, it really is in part about priorities and about recognizing sort of internally, right? What do I value? What is important? And how do I make time for what is important? What I mean by that is, even before COVID, I talked to people all the time who told me they can't take breaks. Like, I don't have time to take breaks. I run into the same thing. I get a busy week and I'm sitting there and I'm working. I got a sandwich in my face and I'm not leaving my desk all day. And if you said to me, Mark, take a break. And I'm like, a break? How can I do, right? COVID has made this worse for sure, right? Has made it harder for sure. But I would argue that fundamentally, our resistance to taking these breaks is really about an internal value system, right? And it's really about how we have so prioritized the work pieces of things that we fail to appreciate just how important and just how valuable those breaks are, that space is. So part of my answer to the question then is to suggest that reframing the value or the challenge that you see to taking breaks is a part of that solution. I would also propose that forcing yourself to do it first, even though you don't perceive the space, right? But just saying, I'm going to force myself to take some breaks. I'm going to do it here. I'm going to do it here. I'm going to do it there, right? That will show you the impact that can have, right? In other words, take the first step by faith, right? And then experience the positivity, even if you don't see it as possible. Do something small, right? It doesn't have to be, well, we're going to spend the whole day at the beach, or we're going to go to the whole day for the park. Make it small, make it simple, right? Take a few minutes to sit in a chair and read a book, or snuggle with your child or your pet, right? Or go for a 15-minute walk around your house, right? These breaks don't need to be gigantic things. They can be small. But even small breaks will reveal to you their value in your own mental health, in your own physical health, and in your relationships with your partners and your kids and your children.
All right, thank you.
I think I answered 4 questions in one. That was my goal with that. So
I
hopefully.
think so. I think so. So we have some questions about trying to communicate with partners and separate the emotional space that you have for work and family. So how would you suggest expressing to your partner that you work from home and so your work responsibilities are still the same as they were before? Things aren't different in that way. Even though you're not going into the office and leaving the house, you still have to do all of your work. So kind of creating that boundary kind of seems to be blurred sometimes. So how do you have that conversation with your partner?
Carefully. No, that's a great question. And I think, as someone who went through that myself, right, I had to, sort of experience recreating my workspace at home and my workday at home. It's a very difficult thing to do for all the reasons you laid out, right? In other words, we have certain expectations about what home looks like and who we are when we're home and what we do when we're home. And for those of us who COVID forced home, right, who made our home place our workplace, we had to have those conversations. And honestly, a part of it is just being that honest about it, right? Having those formal conversations with our partners about, what space do I need? What time do I need, right? One of those items on one of the slides above said something about, being proactive about setting time and space boundaries. And having that honest conversation about, when I'm working at these times, I really am not available for certain family things, right? And again, I don't pretend these conversations are easy, but being direct about what those expectations are is an important part of that process. I would also encourage folks to evaluate what of that is real and what of that is a part of my old mindset of I go to work, I'm at work, I come home, I'm at home. In other words, if you have the flexibility where you can be doing your work at home, right, which is the context of the question you're asking, then you no doubt have some flexibility, some control over your work and what you're doing and when and what that looks like. And so I would also encourage each of us as individuals to evaluate, do I need to recreate I'm gone from 9 to 5 while I'm home at work and honey, don't bother me then. And those are my time. And it may be that's the case, right? I'm not saying that that won't be the case for some folks, but I do think it's to evaluate, is there some flexibility there? So it's not just about educating our partner and involving our partner in the conversation about the space that we need for our own work, but it is also looking introspectively and evaluating, to what extent can I create a different work reality in my home that allows me to be a little bit more engaged and a little more flexible on some sort of schedule or some sort of time, so that we have not just then created sort of the same problematic work arrangement that existed before COVID, which was, work time is just work time and it's the most important thing, and it can't be interrupted for anything, which I don't think is a great model anyway. So I think there's responsibilities on both sides of that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And so one of the kind of follow-up questions to that is when you're trying to have these conversations with your family members about what the new boundaries are going to be, you mentioned something about including your kids in those conversations and what kinds of activities and things that they still need to have happen. So how do you involve your kids in those discussions?
Well, and here's where I need to explicitly exercise a very clear caveat, which is to say that I am not an expert in child development, right? My expertise is in the workforce and work life and work family balance, et cetera. So I'm gonna use some general terms to describe the answer to that. Which should all just end with, and then talk to somebody who's an expert in child development for the more correct answers, right? But my point is two things, I think, to your question, right? In other words, there's an age appropriateness type of conversation to be had, right? Depending with children of different ages and to what extent you are talking about COVID and the challenges that has brought any family. And actually, gosh, several months ago, I think maybe in April, it might have been May, the ICDFR put on an entire webinar about talking to your children about COVID. So I would encourage folks for whom this is a question, check out our YouTube page and there's some good detail in that one. But what I mean to suggest is that to the extent that, there are family responsibilities around the house. And I know for us, for example, we've been pretty shut down in my family, meaning, staying at home and staying out of the social environment, which has meant much more, the house is messier, the house is, there's more dishes, there's, more meals to be cooked, there's more. And so I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. And so thinking about, okay, they've always done little things, but what more can they do? Can they help with the dish? Can they unload the dishwasher? Can they, okay, now you're taking out the garbage, or, there's little just tasks around the house that they can help, they can be a part of. And not only is that helpful from the perspective of it reduces the stress at home on parents, right? But these are also important esteem building and efficacy building events for the kids themselves, right? They see themselves as making a contribution to the family. They see themselves as hey, I'm responsible. I can do certain things, and so so what I would say is talk to a child development specialist about what those specific things are. But there are age appropriate tasks to get children involved in.
All right, thank you.
And I answered the question. I felt like I started to go in a different direction. All right.
No, that's good. Those are good suggestions. So a couple of questions about how to manage work things that come up during what you're trying to have be your family time. So after normal work hours. So do you have recommendations for how to manage your job requirements that happen when you're trying to have family time? So like having calls and emails when you're spending time with your kids. It's not really always clear what your organizational expectations are. And so remote workers can kind of be taken advantage of in this way. So, so what are your recommendations on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And my first answer to that is actually to the leaders out there, right? And so my first response to the leaders is, protect your employees' family time. To the extent that you can limit emails, requests, tasks that go out either via text or via email during non-work hours, right? You should do that as a leader. That that's your responsibility, I believe, and that's definitely an opinion. I realize that's but it's an opinion based on the research, right? It's an opinion based on the fact that we know that when we're interfering and we're creating increased work-family conflict, that has negative consequences for our workers and their families, right? So my first response to that is to the leaders: don't do that, right? And I recognize that's hard to do. I work with a lot of folks. We have a lot of projects at the ICDFR. I am constantly doing email at night and trying not to, right? And trying not to send emails at night and not to send emails on the weekend, because I don't want folks who work with us to feel like they have to pay attention to something just because the email came along, right? So I think there's an important responsibility on the part of leaders. On the part of individuals, though, it's a little bit different, right? Because the consequences, you framed it, I thought, very interestingly. You said something about there's a fear of consequences for not responding, right? That as a remote worker, you're vulnerable to being taken advantage of in that regard. And so I think for the worker in that scenario, that part of the solution is truly being honest and thoughtful about where is that line, right? In other words, I could check my email after 7 o'clock at night, but is there really a consequence for not, right? Is it me wanting to be that perfect worker, or is it me just, or is it truly that if I don't do it, I'm going to be, the project's going to fail, I'm going to get fired, because I think we, in our own minds, escalate sometimes, or elevate, I probably should say, the consequences to higher levels than they really are, right? And the reality of if I were to really say, you know what, I'm going to protect that time, and after 7 o'clock, I'm really not going to check email, and that's the only way it works, by the way, right? So assuming we feel comfortable in doing that, generally we're not very good at doing it halfway, right? Because there's a version of this where people go, well, I'll check my email, but I'll only respond to what's most urgent. Well, that just doesn't work, because again, these email systems and our nature now, we're set up. It's there. It's a priority. It's important. I got to do it. One more thing, hon. I just got to do one more thing, and then we're fine, right? I mean, that's sort of what happens. And so it really is a conscious decision to shut that access off and say, I'm not going to have those notifications pop up. I'm not just going to go check just to make sure. I'm not, right? It really requires that intentionality and that proactive approach. But I do share the concern, right? I recognize that sense of urgency that so many of us feel. And so part of it is really evaluating what's causing that urgency. Is it really that it's urgent? Is it really that I have to focus on this? Or have I just created that, right? And again, in the beginning, right, I talked a little bit about, these pressures, they come from our organizations, they come from our supervisor, they come from societal norms, and we internalize them ourselves, right? To where we hyper value being a good worker, right? Over other things like being a good parent, being a good partner, being a good child, right? And so, son or daughter, I probably should say child, I meant of adult parents, right? And so critically evaluating that and recognizing that, are the pressures real, or are they a product of those sort of social pressures that actually, if I just said, yeah, you know what, this is my protected time, that would be okay. There are no short answers, just so you know, none.
Of course, never.
None. Yeah.
So in trying to work through kind of distinguishing what is real versus what is perceived and what the actual consequences are going to be, what are some of the conversations that can be had between workers and supervisors, or between leaders and their employees, to where workers can understand that it's okay to not always feel like they need to always be available for work? So if I get an email at 8 p.m., how do I know from my boss that it's going to be okay that I don't respond right away, for example? What can the leader do to kind of make people feel at ease with creating these boundaries?
Yeah. You saw the look in my eyes, right? The look in my eye was like, oh, I don't know. It's rough. I mean, that's tough, right? I mean, I like that you turned it back on the leader, right? Because I do think that's another very good example of acknowledging that employees don't know, right? Employees, it's uncertain, and that sort of anxiety and trepidation around, trying to create that space for my life and my family while still valuing work and risking that. Now, is my supervisor going to think I'm not as invested, that I don't care, that I'm not working as hard, right? So from the employee perspective, there is a pretty big cloud of uncertainty in the absence of supervisors and leaders who are proactively communicating to their employees the importance of family, the importance of health, the importance of breaks. Now, I would argue that in some sectors of our, in some industries and in some sectors of our society, we're seeing some of that, right? We're seeing more awareness around, hey, we need to value people as people. Right. And we're workers as people. We need to spend more time acknowledging that, societally, we are better off when organizations that employ people also value, their health and their families and what they do to how they contribute to society in other ways other than a productive part of the workforce. Right. And so I do think an important part of that is that leaders remove that uncertainty, remove that ambiguity, right? By communicating that support and making clear what's expected and what's not. From an employee perspective, right, it's more difficult. And I acknowledge that. And for some, the fear of that conversation is probably legitimate. And they want, and it's not and I would acknowledge that those conversations have to be done carefully. And it may be that you don't feel comfortable having that conversation with your supervisor, right? But perhaps having conversations more generally about family and about non-work responsibilities without doing it in the context of an ask or a demand, right, is part of the way to facilitate that conversation. For other people who have more open and constructive already communicative relationships with their supervisors or their leaders, then those conversations are easier, right? Another path for those conversations is through human resources in many organizations, right? Having conversations and learning more about what the policies and practices are and communicating needs. It's a little bit of a safer way to have those conversations, right? Where you're not having to do it with your direct supervisor. So those are some other examples, but I don't pretend that that's an easy conversation to have. And in some cases, it's not employees will not feel safe having that conversation. And unfortunately, one of the things that you mentioned when you read my bio, right? I'm particularly interested in the work-life challenges of low-income workers and low-wage shift workers, and I think those are some of the hardest positions for managing what you're talking about, right? And some of those are, and for folks like that, those conversations are some of the most concerning, right? Because of the fear of, if I become a problem, then I'm not going to have this job anymore. And so I would go back to the message, especially for leaders. If you are a leader of part-time workers, low-wage shift workers, et cetera, you have an incredible opportunity and responsibility, I would argue, to show that support to your employees and have those conversations with your employees, so that because they don't have a lot of other solutions.
That's a good point. Thank you, Dr. Eggers. I think just to kind of wrap up, we're going to try to get this finished in the next few minutes, but I kind of want to bring it back to it's really difficult, as you've mentioned throughout the whole talk, that it's really difficult to try to navigate and appropriately and properly do any of this kind of balancing of work-family demands. And so how long does it take someone to figure out how to really balance this? And how do we maintain some self-forgiveness and self-compassion as we're working through this and when we mess up?
Yeah, I don't know how to put a time frame on it, to be honest with you. I'd like to say it's about 2.5 weeks and then you're there, right? But unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way. But what I would suggest is it does take patience, right? And it also does take finding what are the right solutions for you and your situation. To what extent is social support the best option? To what extent is working with your supervisor and your organization the best option? To what extent is it your partner, right? And I think part of that figuring out process that you're asking about and why it does take time is because each of our situations is a little bit different, both in terms of the challenges we're experiencing and the solutions that are afforded to us, right? And so finding the ones that work can sometimes take time. I also think, though, that what I find anyway, is that when I'm doing it, right, when I'm engaged in those, in clarifying my expectations and forgiving my failures and being proactive about communicating with my partner about who's doing what and how we're getting it done, the impact comes pretty quickly. I don't mean all my problems go away, but I mean, even those small examples of engaging in these activities feed into you, give you rewards, give you positive feedback. That's what I would feed into you is supposed to be, gives you positive feedback on your efforts. And you kind of start to see, even in small ways, that these changes in perspective, changes in approach, whatever they may be, that they are having that positive impact, even if it's small. But I would add to that too, that it isn't like there's a finish line, so to speak, right? As you start to do these things, what you recognize is it's not about doing them and then everything's fixed. It's about doing them so that they become incorporated into who you are, and who you are as a worker, who you are as a spouse, who you are as a parent, and that it just becomes a part of your activities, not a thing you did to fix a problem, but rather it's changes that you made in who you are and how you approach work and family responsibilities that make you better able to manage those and make you less likely to experience the mental, the physical, and the relational consequences of work-life conflict.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Agers, again for your time. And thank you to everyone who attended this webinar hosted by the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations at California State University, San Bernardino. We've been providing guidance for parents and families based on science and best practice since 2002. So thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful day and be well.
Thank you, everyone.